Welcome to the FCIAC football podcast. I'm Dave Rudin. We're coming off a bye week where actually the Wilton football team played what would normally be its Thanksgiving game, and they took the long ride to Tolland and came away with a win. So they're 5-0 right now, and they actually did play a game. Real quickly, and not everybody may know about this, but I was involved with Fairfield County Walk to End Alzheimer's, and I got about there were probably about 36 teams there yesterday, including a bunch of FCIAC football teams, and we raised probably about we're around $51,000. So anybody out there and my guest I'm about to introduce, his team was there. There were a bunch of football players there, football teams there. I wanted to thank everybody, but there's no intro since there's no football this past weekend, but I knew with the bye week, I wanted to do a podcast with my guest, Mitch Ross, the Fairfield Ludlowe football coach, who has been real active. He's the reason his plan to have a more competitive FCIAC league schedule is one of the reasons now why the regular season is so much more meaningful, and we're seeing more competitive games with teams of like ability and past experiences playing against one another. And Mitch is real active now, wanting to take his ideas and bring it to the state level. I think even though we haven't gotten to the state playoffs, the playoffs are a mess every year because we keep changing things every year, and we've got six divisions, which is just ridiculous. But anyhow, the whole idea, I think everybody agrees, we want something permanent, but we want something that works. And I don't think there's any coach more than Mitch who's been spending time on this. So perfect week to have Mitch on my podcast and talk state playoffs. So Mitch, good to see you. Thanks a lot.
Oh, my pleasure. Always a pleasure to be on.
First of all, just Falcons off to a 2-2 start. Is that a good 2-2? It should be a better 2-2, or where do you stand right now?
Well, we had some 4 tough games that we had to play, and Hall, who was 9-1, and Xavier, which was a good team, and Wilton, which is undefeated, and then Norwalk. So we played 4 playoff contenders, let's call everybody. So so we held our own. The difficulty was we did end up with a lot of injuries, and that wore on as the weeks went on. So hopefully the bye week will get healthy and get back to being at close to full strength.
Okay. I didn't even look at the schedule. Who do you have coming up this week?
Well, we have McMahon this week, followed by Darien, Trumbull, New Canaan. So there's
McMahon right now looks like the easiest of the 4 games, but they're a much better team than their record indicates.
Yeah, McMahon's I think obviously going through tape, McMahon's a very good team. So it's not going to be, this will be a hard week followed by super hard week, followed by super hard week, followed by another super hard week. So we have our work cut out for us.
All right, well, let's get to the state playoffs and let's solve this for everything, or at least give some food for thought. You've been real active on this, and when we talked in the preseason, I thought better podcasts where people can see and hear you rather than just write a story. So what in your eyes are the problems that need to be addressed? We can agree, first of all, that six divisions is ridiculous.
Well, I think most coaches, that's not their complaint. They don't mind more teams making the playoffs. I think the big issue is the CIAC views everything as numbers as being the only numbers, and school of choice as being the only 2 factors. And I think what we see this year is that obviously that's not the case, that it's not just about how many boys that you have in your school, 9th grade through 12th grade. It's not whether you're just a school of choice. There are a lot of other factors. And I think a lot of coaches now would like that to be accounted for when they make up the divisions. For example, I think the easiest example is the city schools. Now there's starting to be some momentum behind, looking at what we're doing in the city schools. So we have, and by city schools, I mean Stamford, Norwalk, Bridgeport, Hartford, Waterbury, West Haven. There are other schools like that. But when you look at the schools that aren't schools of choice in those divisions, you come up with 20 odd teams. And they face many, many more challenges than other teams. And it doesn't matter what their population is, they're not on an equal footing as to, let's say, a Greenwich, which often they're in the same division as, or a private school, which they can often be in the same division. So I think that needs to be accounted for. And I would like to see putting those 20 odd schools in one division to start, call it the city division, you have to be in the top 10 densest cities, the top 10 most populous cities. So that basically eliminates places like Fairfield and Greenwich wouldn't be in this division, but it would include West Haven, it would include Bridgeport, it would include Stamford, it would include Norwalk. And these teams put all the non-private schools in these divisions and have them compete, against teams that are facing similar challenges. As we all know, the city schools face, much more adversity than, some of the wealthy suburban schools. And that should be accounted for. So if we take those schools out, it gives them something to play for. It can take you an awfully long way if you're trying to coach a team in one of these cities and you have a shot to make the playoffs, and you can actually make the playoffs and win a game. And somebody, a good team will win that division. This year, West Haven's good, or Central's good on occasion, or Norwalk or McMahon, or whatever the team is. But it really gives, or Stanford, it gives these teams something to shoot for. And I think that would really help the football players and the coaches in these cities to motivate kids to play football, to motivate kids to put in the work. So I think that would be a real boon to the state of Connecticut, and it would be a real signal that we're interested in helping these city schools. And I think the CIAC should start to look at factors really other than just population, because it doesn't matter that Danbury would be another city that would be in it. It doesn't matter that Danbury's has a bigger high school than Greenwich. That's not the only thing that makes those two cities different. Danbury faces many more challenges, and Danbury should be in the city division. So, by going about something in a common sense way, so that would make sense as far as one division. Another instances are the teams that have advantages over most other teams. That includes schools that charge tuition. They get to pick their players. It's not a random selection of boys in the community or young men in the community. It's picked. They get to admit kids. You also have schools that have towns that have only one team, and that's a huge advantage. You could start with the youth programs. The youth programs can all game at funneling all their kids to one program. So those towns have a huge advantage. And there are a lot of those towns. There are a lot of because Connecticut's a fairly small state with a lot of small towns. There are a lot of one town teams, probably about 80 of them. Or 90 of them. So you could make 3 divisions of those by size. And then you break it down by size. The bigger one-town teams, the middle one-town teams, the smaller one-town teams. That would take care of 4 divisions. And then you have another division of teams that have towns that have 2 or more teams. And that would give you another division, a fairly competitive division, because there are quite a few teams like that. That way you'd have 5 divisions of teams that are equal, not just on student population, that would just be one factor, but also equal on other challenges they face. And I think it would make for a more interesting playoffs. You would avoid, hopefully, those 70-0 first and second round games. And it would also give towns a chance, or teams a chance, to compete with more similar teams. And that would help everybody. Whether the playoffs are 2 rounds or 3 rounds, I think that's, for a different day, whether it's 5 divisions, 6 divisions, or 4 divisions. At the end of the day, whatever system you make up, you have to look at what the result is and then say, oh, this makes sense, or, well, it was a good idea, but it doesn't make sense. And I think under good ideas that don't make sense, what happened last year is, it wasn't that it was ill-conceived. It was just a good idea that at the end of the day, when you saw what came out of it, you couldn't say, oh, these divisions make sense. Obviously it doesn't make any sense that, L has, based on last year's record, a far better record than double L, supposedly the bigger, harder division. So that you can't come up with something, my system, anybody's system, any group that creates a system, you can't just come up with something, throw it in the computer, have it spit out and say, and somebody has to evaluate it and say, hey, look, this makes no sense. Or, hey, this came out very well. It's not perfect. None of them are going to be perfect, but it came out very well. And really part and parcel to that, the CIAC has to come out and mandate inter-conference games. It does no good to compare teams who never play with another conference. Using that technique of just, points from, what people's records are, you could take a sixth grade youth football league, and some teams 8-0 in that. So are they equivalent to an 8-0, high school team? Obviously no. Or is an 8-0 NFL team comparable? No. So it all depends on the competition you're playing. So by one method or another method, the CIAC has to mandate it. Whether you say, if you don't play 3 or 4 interconference games, you're not eligible for the playoffs, or do it instead of a punitive system, say, hey, for the first 4 interconference games you play, you will get, whether you win or lose, you'll get all the points for their victories. Meaning if a team's 10-0 that you play, you'll get 100 points, whether you win or lose, for those interconference games. And that will incentivize teams to schedule for interconference games, and also schedule against good opponents, right? If you're going to get, 10 wins based on New Canaan or a team winning 10 games, then you're more likely to say, oh, I'll play them. I'll get just as many points as if I beat a team that's 0-10. And isn't that how it should be? Isn't it much harder to play a team that's, going undefeated or has 9 wins than somebody who has no wins? So that would also make sense. And then that would also clarify, it would give you a much easier way to compare conference to conference, because there'd be so many interconference games. Because not only would you get points for your conference's wins when you play that opponent, the other conference wouldn't get that win. So if the best team in a conference was now 6-4 because they lost all their interconference games, well, that in a way evens out what it looks like for the playoffs point wise. And I think those two things really would go a long, long way to making this a much better situation, a much more fair situation. And then hopefully the idea is to get the best teams in the playoffs, whatever those best teams are, wherever
and I agree with you. That's the bottom line, is the best team. That's where, and I agree with you from talking on some things and don't on others. That's where, and I don't know what the solution is. I can't counter right now. I have to think about it more with what we do with the inner city schools. But at the end of the day, we still want to have the best teams. And I don't know that, unfortunately, because of the situation the inner city schools are in, how many of them are really, can you say, are going to be amongst the best teams? So just to put them in a division, to me, that's like saying in baseball, we take all the teams that have a payrolls of 50 million and below and put them in one division, and 80 million and below, and do it by payroll. This is by demographic more, and unfortunately, these city teams, I don't know how many of them really deserve to be playing for a championship. But at the same time, I agree. What we need to do is put them in the best position possible that they can compete to be in that position.
But they're competing against teams that have different advantages that they're not going to be able to get. So we have to help out the city schools and have them to have a championship that they can contend for. It would mean so much to these kids, these inner city kids, if their football team is in the playoffs, their football team won a playoff game, as opposed to their football team not, it's one, they're not competing, they don't have the same advantages. So to expect them to compete year in and year out against the Greenwich is asking, or Fairfield Prep is asking far too much. I mean, it's just not fair to them. So they don't
That's not, but
care.
is that ultimately where you want to go? Where we're saying that you have to, that they have to be in the playoffs every year or more often, and just
Well, they wouldn't be in the playoffs more often. You still have a division of whatever it is, 22, 24 teams. It's only the top 8 or the top 4, whatever you decide, make the playoffs. So it's still not an easy road. That'll be one out of every 3 teams makes the playoffs, or one out of every 6
what would
teams.
you do then if you were to have a division like that? Then how do you separate the other divisions?
Well, I try to explain that probably poorly, but so you have one city division. I think when I did the rough numbers, it comes to like 22 or something like that. Then you do a division, then you do all the one-town teams. You line them up and split them down by population. In addition, what I would do in that to try to make things a little bit more fair, or to get better teams in, I think the one-town teams that have the biggest population, that division would be more like 24 teams. The next one-town high school teams would have like 28 teams, and the smallest would have 32 teams. Because, as you said, gets to be less and less good teams as you go down. So I don't think there's any magic about keeping divisions the same size. So certainly that one-town high school teams, the largest of those, which would include towns like New Canaan, Greenwich, Darien, those would end up being in a much smaller division number-wise, and that would certainly be, the strongest division. And that would be likely where the number 1 team out of the state would come. And then you would have the smaller one-town teams. I forgot where the break came, but that might include towns like Hand and teams like Hand and the like.
But what if you have the year, and I know it doesn't happen as often. What if you have the year where Danbury's got a really, Danbury's a top 5 or top 10 team? You would end up maybe having them where they're blowing out teams in that division, and we're having the same kind of blowouts that we get in the first round now. When the year when they're on a par with New Canaan and Darien. I know that doesn't happen real often, but there are instances, or you have a time where you get a Dave Catalina who one of the best coaching jobs in state history was when he had Bridgeport Central as a top program for about a decade or so.
But I think that's what we want. What we want is, I think it's much easier for a coach to develop those kind of programs when they're competitive year in and year out.
Yeah.
Versus when they're 0-10 or they're getting beat up. It's very.
I agree, but don't we want them in that year though, when it does happen, to be playing to prove who's really the best team?
Well, you could always, if you want, you could always have an extra game at the end playing the one team in the city school against the one team in the others. But I don't think it'll happen a ton. Certainly if a city school wants,
it's certainly not going to happen a lot, but when it does happen, the biggest problem to me, and you agree with that, is we want to have the best teams in. We want to have the best teams in there.
But look at a team, let's call West Haven, who looks like a very strong team. So West Haven, let's say they would win the city division this year. Maybe. I mean, I don't know if they would or they wouldn't or whatever. But let's say West Haven has a really good team, or Danbury, or whatever the town may be, has a super team, and they win that division. Well, that's going to drive football program for a while. Hopefully it'll happen to another team. Then a West Haven will get better. Then a Central will get better. And as I said, any system's not perfect. So you're not going to have, it where no matter how you split it up, you're not going to have the best 36 teams in the playoffs. I mean, it doesn't matter what system you come up with, it will never happen like that. But all I'm trying to do is not so concerned about, I am concerned about getting the best teams in the playoffs, but I'm also concerned about helping those schools have a goal they can meet, who are facing much more adversity than towns that that have much fewer challenges. And I think we have to look at that part of football. It's not always crowning who's the best team, because that's one team out of 150. So, I mean, that shouldn't be what people are striving for. You shouldn't strive to be, oh, I want to be the number one team out of 150 and anything else is a failure, because it's not, that means there are 149 failures. I don't think, if, let's say, the city schools division was weak and their best team was 7-3 and they won the city division, I don't think they would be hanging their heads saying, oh, we had 3 losses, we're not the best team in the state. They would be thrilled, hey, we won the city division.
If you call anything a championship, they're going to be happy with it, because basketball's the biggest mess. And you know, I'm not going to go off topic here, but if you win Division 3 or Division 4 in basketball, it's like, what are you the best of? And you know, there's, again, that's going off topic, but that's basically it's an amorphous type of division, and I don't know what you are the best of, but the CIAC calls it a championship division. So you're happy to win the championship, and you should be. You're the best of whatever group that's put together.
Currently, that's what the CIAC does things by how many boys in 9th through 12th grade. And then I think that CIAC had their heart in the right place, and they realized that school of choice portrayed a huge advantage to these schools, and they try to make that a little more equitable by pushing them up a division or 2 divisions or 3 divisions for the teams that were successful. However, that doesn't really work when double L is a weaker conference than L, or double M, and I don't even know if this is true, is weaker than M, or you know, the like. They have to, so pushing up a division doesn't really help. In addition, there's some, of course, school of choice teams that are double L to begin with, so that doesn't affect them at all. You know, so I think the CIAC has tried some of these approaches. They've also understand that there's a big issue with making a competitive schedule, and that it's easy for a team to schedule weak opponents, go 10-0, make the playoffs. So they try to give points to even losses when you lost to a team. However, without combining that with mandating interconference games, it really has no effect, right? If you get points for within your conference and nobody ever plays out of conference, well, that doesn't help you get in versus a weaker conference if you're in a strong conference, because each conference is going to have a 10-0 team, a 9-1 team, an 8-2 team, a 7-3 team, a 0-10 team. So each conference is going to have a similar makeup. So a 10-0 team or a 9-1 team from a very weak conference is going to make it over an 8-2 team from a strong conference, even counting losses. So that doesn't really go far enough. But the CIAC, I think, has their heart in the right place. They're trying, but they're not accomplishing it because they're not really going far enough, and they're not looking at the whole picture. And I think the same thing with the numbers is that you can't just make conference by the numbers. I mean, it'd be nice if it was just as simple as that. And sure, if the town was made up of all inner city schools, then you could go by numbers. Or if they were made by all one high school team towns, then you could go by that as well. But our state is, you know, varied. There are inner city schools, there in between schools, there's towns where they're very small, and one team towns that are very big. So you can't really do a one modality and use that as your only judgment. So you have to look at different ways to do it. And that's why I say you look at this city school division, fine, that's one way done. One team towns, that's another way done. 2 and more team towns, that's another way done. And then you also mix that up with population. So
how do you decide where Ward goes, and how do you decide where Ludlow goes? They're both in the same division.
They're both in the same division. They're both with teams like Trumbull and every other school that has more than one town and one team in each town. And they're
some towns, I mean,
so there's towns like So it would be like the Fairfield teams would be in it. The Trumbull would be in it. I did it out. There's quite a few. There are about 25, 26, something like that, 28 teams that have come from towns that have more than one
I'm
team.
not trying to get into the private school again. Yeah, it's in Trumbull, but but St. Joseph is drawing.
Yeah, and that's why I don't think Trumbull.
Yeah, I mean,
That's why I think you don't have to, it doesn't count as a school. That's why just using school of choice and making them equivalent, like McMahon being equivalent to prep. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, those aren't the
No
same.
sense. So why, and then they understand it makes no sense. So they say, oh, you have to be a school of choice and be successful. But it still doesn't really matter because prep's in double L anyway, and McMahon's in double L. So you're not really accomplishing anything. You're trying, you understand the problem, but you're not really accomplishing anything. And look, if you're saying, oh, there are enough teams just to have school of choice divisions, well, that's fine. Then just have school of choice divisions. But I'm not sure there are. But if there are, as I said, my suggestion is just one way of thinking about it. It's not the whole thing.
I think for sure you've got a lot of good ideas out there that whenever the competition committee sits down, they should be weighing all of these things. They should certainly all be discussed and kind of figure out which is most feasible and which aren't. Because I agree with you on some things, I don't agree with you on others, but I do. I mean, you raise a lot of points that nobody's discussed or thought about. I haven't heard anybody bring up just having like a city school division, even though it's become topical now and should be about addressing the inequities between the demographics and the affluence of towns.
And frankly, I don't expect everybody to agree with me.
Right.
I mean, certainly what I'm suggesting is not perfect or anywhere close to perfect. I don't think we can get perfection. We can just do better. And I think, certainly there'll be many people who disagree, many people who agree, but, we just need, I think at the end of the day, most rational people would agree that something like that is at least better. It might not be, the only answer. It might not be the sole answer, but at least it's a starting point. And then, as I said, then you have to look at what you created. What have you really created at the end of it? And then does that help at all? Maybe, what I'm suggesting, it comes out and it looks like awful for some reason. Okay, then fine. Then you have to go back to the drawing board, which I think is what the CIAC really had to do when they added more divisions and changed things.
They did the wrong thing. There was some inequity, so let's just put more teams out there. And the coaches like it because it gives them a better chance to make the playoffs and it gives them a better chance to win a championship. But we're seeing it between the different strengths in the divisions. That Connecticut can't support 6 champions as much as the CIAC loves giving trophies away, and especially the major sports like basketball and football. But I don't think how we get there. I don't think there should be 3 or 4 divisions, and how we separate them is what we have to get right to make sure the best team. To me, it's I want the best teams in there.
Yeah, but if you're able to pick out those good teams, it's also possible to have less teams in the playoffs, shorten the season some too. I mean, if you have more divisions, let's say you have 6 divisions, you can have 2 rounds of playoffs as opposed to 3. Because Connecticut, we still rotate around Thanksgiving, and since we're not a warm weather state, that puts the playoffs, mid-December, the championship. And I mean, I remember a few years ago when we played at West Haven for Darien, I think we were the last high school game in the country. Now that would make sense if we're in Florida, or Southern California, but to be the last high school game in the country in Connecticut makes no sense whatsoever.
I love Thanksgiving football. I just think we have to. This weekend right now should really be when all the when all the rivalry. Columbus Day weekend, I think should be rivalry weekend. I say that begrudgingly because I like Thanksgiving football, and I know a lot of coaches from schools that never get a chance to compete for the playoffs say that is our state championship game. But you know, it getting rid of Thanksgiving football changes the whole dynamic, not just of football, but all sports and how seasons start and end, which could be addressed as well. Football players get no break going if they play a winter sport, but we could start. There's no reason why we can't start the season a week or two earlier also.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to Thanksgiving because, being rivalry at when I was at Darien and now at Ludlow, I understand those games are very important, not just to the teams, to the communities. So I can see the impetus. It does make it difficult. It makes it difficult for
Yeah,
the
that's a tough answer, and it's also affects school budgets because you raise a lot of money from those
yeah.
games.
I mean, I don't know if, as you mentioned, you start the season a little earlier, a week or two earlier. You have the playoffs, and then you have the Thanksgiving games. And when they match up, great. When you have a championship that happens to be the rivalry, fine, you push that to Thanksgiving. But, I'm not sure that that's the answer. I think that's a very difficult problem. That's actually more difficult than
Oh yeah,
divisions.
you're gonna have too many coaches who are gonna be clutching and clawing to the Thanksgiving games that will never
Yes.
give them up. And again, I don't blame them for feeling that way.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, Thanksgiving's a difficult thing to broach, and I don't think there's any real good answer for that.
And I don't think if you want to have good playoffs, you can like go with the proposal, play around to the playoffs, then go to Thanksgiving, and then have the playoffs resume again. It just throws too many factors in there because then what do? You don't play any of your starters on Thanksgiving because you don't want to get them hurt. That's not the solution at all.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just a difficult problem.
I think
But
from this discussion, we can agree right now where everybody does. It's not an easy, it's easy to say the system's broken, it doesn't work. It's a lot harder to say what we should do, but I really think there should be a thorough committee, and you should definitely be on it because you at least bring up ideas that haven't been discussed, and everything should be on the table and try, what system ends up being the most equitable?
yeah, and I think the CIAC, to their credit, has tried. I just think I just think it just hasn't quite gone far enough. I mean, I think they see the problems, they understand the problems. It's just the fix that's been difficult. And I do think for each sport it's different. So I don't think you can have a one size fits all sports. All I can comment is on football.
Yeah.
Each different sport is going to have their own issues. As I saw, my kids played lacrosse, and the lacrosse playoffs were always, a
I mean,
trap.
my radical idea for every single sport is to try for a year or two and have a seeding committee. And to me, that's if you have everybody represented, you should be able to come to seed teams and seed playoffs, and at least set
I
things
wouldn't
up.
bet. I wouldn't bet on that. I see how the polls go, and I still remember the year where Greenwich lost to the team in Florida. This stacked team with a
Yeah,
couple of NFL, and they finished in the state second because they lost to a team that would have beat any team in the state 80-0. The team had the San Francisco running back or whatever,
yeah.
10-year starter in the NFL. So the name
Frank
escapes.
Gore was a Frank
Yeah, it
Gore.
was
Yeah,
Gore. It
Frank
was
Gore.
Gore.
Frank. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but so I wouldn't go. I don't think a seating committee does it. But you know what? These aren't easy. Questions.
Yeah.
They're not easy solutions. But but we could just do better. And I think that
Yeah.
each
Yeah.
each year we need to do better. It's not if you do something one year, okay, something worked and something didn't work. How could we make it better? And I think that's what you keep on working for. We don't have to be so rigid that it's one size fits all and one size for every year. But it's time that you looked at things and saw patterns. I mean, the good thing about doing this thing the same for the last 20 years pretty much is that it's very obvious where the inequities are, because
Right.
we've seen them year in and year out. So it's in many ways, it's easy to take the first step now.
All right. Well, Mitch, just from this discussion, it's not just with two people talking about it. It's not a. We definitely agree that there's a problem that needs fixing, which I think everybody does. And just this discussion shows, with us agreeing on some things and disagreeing on others, it's you throw more people in the room, and uh, something's got to be done, and it's got to get to the point we've got to experiment and then find and just not keep changing the state playoffs every year, every 2 years. So we've discussed it a lot, and I think it's great that you're as passionate about it as you are. We need more people like you to come and be part of the solution instead of anybody, the things that just staying the same and having the same old problems. So thanks for doing all of this, and thanks a lot for taking the time here. I think this will be I don't know, outside of the FCIAC, how many people are familiar with what you've done. So hopefully this brings your thought process to a wider audience.
Well, thank you very much. Been a pleasure.
Thanks. And that's the FCIAC football podcast for this week. Again, I want to thank Mitch Ross for joining me. I want to thank Cooper Boardman for the sound editing. And we'll be back and talking football games next week. Have a good week, everybody.